I was 28 when my doorbell rang in the middle of the night. It was 2 a.m. The sky outside was dark and quiet, except for the hum of the street lamp outside my apartment window. I had just gotten used to sleeping alone. My husband Thomas had left 2 weeks ago for a year-long work assignment in Europe. We had talked about it for months. It was a big opportunity for him. I promised I'd hold things down here. But I never expected this. When I opened the door, I saw Janet, my sister-in-law, standing there. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She looked hollow. Beside her were her 3 kids, Hunter, Annie, and Grace. Each one holding a trash bag full of belongings. They looked like they hadn't slept. Hunter, the oldest, stared at the ground. Annie clung to Grace's hand. Grace's hair was matted and her jacket was on inside out. Before I could ask what was going on, Janet shoved a wrinkled envelope into my hands. "They're yours now," she said, her voice flat and tired. "I need a break." Then she turned, walked down the stairs, and got into a car that was waiting with the engine running. I stood frozen in the doorway as the car disappeared down the street. I looked at the envelope. Inside were online guardianship forms. No signatures. No notary stamp. Just printed papers that anyone could have pulled off the internet. I was stunned. I stepped aside and told the kids to come in. They obeyed silently, like they didn't even know how to ask questions anymore. I closed the door behind them and sat on the floor of the hallway, my back against the wall, heart racing. How was this happening? Where did Janet go? What was I supposed to do? I wasn't a parent. I barely knew how to take care of myself some days. But there were 3 traumatized children now sitting in my living room, and they had nowhere else to go. I called the police. They arrived within the hour. I showed them the envelope. They looked at the kids, took down my statement, and said they'd file a report. But because the children were with a family member and not technically abandoned in a public place, it didn't count as legal abandonment. They told me to call CPS in the morning. They wished me luck and left. That night, I tried to make everyone comfortable. I gave them pajamas from my old donation box and let them sleep in my bed. Hunter stayed awake all night. He sat upright, eyes on the front door, clutching a flashlight he found in the kitchen drawer. Annie sobbed into a pillow until she passed out. Grace wet the bed around 3 a.m. but didn't say a word. I laid on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. When the sun finally rose, I made cereal for everyone. None of the kids spoke. They just ate slowly, like they were waiting for the next terrible thing to happen. I called CPS the moment their office opened. They sent a caseworker named Scott to visit that same day. Scott was kind. He explained emergency kinship care to me. It was a temporary solution, but it would give me legal authority to get the kids medical care, enroll them in school, and apply for support. He helped me file the forms. He also gave me a packet with local resources and trauma-informed therapy options. That night, the kids still slept in my bed. I slept on the floor beside them. Grace clung to my arm. Annie whispered, "Will she come back?" I didn't know what to say. Within a week, I got the kids enrolled in school. I used my lunch breaks to fill out paperwork. I bought second-hand clothes and backpacks. They all needed haircuts. They all needed hugs. They all needed more than I knew how to give. I worked full-time at a publishing house downtown. My hours were long, but I needed the paycheck. I started taking on freelance proofreading jobs at night. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. By the second month, my savings were gone. Thomas was sending money, but Europe was expensive, and his rent abroad ate up most of his paycheck. We FaceTimed at night, and I updated him on everything. He looked exhausted and guilty. He wanted to come home, but his contract was ironclad. Leaving would have cost him his position and reputation. We agreed it was better if he stayed. Even if it didn't feel right. I started noticing changes in the kids. Grace flinched whenever I raised my voice. Annie hoarded granola bars under her pillow. Hunter barely spoke at all. His teacher emailed to say he hadn't turned in any homework since arriving. He sat in the back of the room and stared at the clock all day. I reached out to Janet's ex, Damon. I hadn't spoken to him in years. He sounded surprised to hear from me. When I explained everything, he cursed under his breath. Janet ran off with some 19-year-old, he said. She said the kids were dragging her down. I asked if he could help. He said he was sorry, but Janet had full custody and he hadn't seen the kids in years. But he gave me some advice: don't count on her coming back. So I didn't. I filed for full legal custody in month 6. A kind lawyer from a local nonprofit offered to represent me for free. Janet never showed up to the hearings. The judge gave her 3 chances. She ignored every one. On the 9th month, my custody petition was approved. I became their legal guardian. The kids didn't cheer or celebrate. They didn't even understand what it meant. But that night, as I tucked them in, Grace pointed at a photo of Janet on the fridge and asked, "Is that lady coming back?" I hesitated, then said, "Not anymore." She nodded. "You're my mommy now." My throat tightened. I kissed her forehead and turned off the light. That moment, that single sentence, erased months of doubt. I wasn't just filling in anymore. I was becoming their mother. Thomas and I began drifting apart, even though we were still technically married. His calls became less frequent. At first, we spoke every other night. Then it turned into once a week. Eventually, it was once a month. Every time I picked up the phone, I hoped to see his name. Sometimes I cried when it didn't come. I didn't blame him entirely. Raising 3 traumatized children alone would have overwhelmed anyone. But I didn't have the option to quit. Someone had to stay. And that someone was me. I became their therapist, their cook, their advocate, their ride to school, and their bedtime story reader. I learned how to register them for school therapy services. I met with counselors. I explained to Grace's kindergarten teacher why she flinched every time a door slammed. I sat in on Hunter's IEP meeting and cried silently when they said he might have PTSD. I baked cupcakes for Annie's birthday even though I had to skip meals that week. I stretched every dollar and borrowed where I could. CPS helped when they could. They sent a voucher for school supplies. They approved daycare hours while I worked. Scott, our caseworker, checked in monthly. He became one of the only people I trusted. Then Janet came back. It was a regular Tuesday. I was packing lunches when I got a call from the kids' school. The secretary sounded nervous. Your sister-in-law is here, and she's yelling." I dropped everything and rushed over. When I arrived, I saw Janet outside the school doors, screaming at the principal. She was drunk. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she reeked of alcohol. She was shouting that I had stolen her babies. The police arrived within minutes. Janet was arrested for public intoxication and disturbing a school environment. I filed a restraining order that same day. That night, we triple-locked the doors. Hunter refused to go to bed. He grabbed a baseball bat and sat by the front door like a soldier. I tried to convince him to sleep, but he said, "I'll protect them." My heart broke. I called Thomas, but he didn't answer. When he finally did 3 days later, he sounded distracted. He told me he was sorry and that things were complicated. Then came the real shock. Janet filed a petition in court to overturn the custody order. She claimed she was sober now and wanted her kids back. The judge ordered a supervised visit to assess her behavior. I warned the kids. I told them they didn't have to say anything. We went to the visitation center. Within 5 minutes, Grace started screaming. Annie froze in her chair and didn't speak. Hunter stood in front of his sisters and said, "Don't come near them." The visit was terminated immediately. Janet stormed out of the building, slamming the door. CPS documented everything. I thought we were done. But a week later, Scott showed up at my apartment with another investigator. Someone had filed an abuse report. It was anonymous, but I knew who it was. They checked the kids, interviewed them, inspected the home. After 2 days, they closed the case as unfounded. But the damage was already done. The kids were terrified again. They asked if they were being taken away. I reassured them, again and again, that they were safe. Then came the worst confrontation. It was late afternoon. I was leaving the grocery store when Janet cornered me in the parking lot. She looked different. Clear eyes. Sober. Pregnant. Or at least, pretending to be. She smiled and said, "I'm having his baby." I didn't understand. She held up her phone. Text messages. Photos. Thomas's name in her inbox. She claimed they'd been in contact the whole time. She said Thomas had been sending her money. I froze. She laughed and said, "You think he was in Europe all this time?" When I got home, I locked the door and went straight to the bathroom. I turned on the shower and cried until I couldn't breathe. That night, I texted Thomas. I asked him if it was true. Was Janet pregnant? Was it his? He called at 3 a.m. His voice was quiet. He admitted it all. He said he never slept with her, but she'd blackmailed him with photos from an office party. He looked drunk in them. She used those photos to make it look like they'd had an affair. She threatened to send them to his boss and coworkers. He panicked and sent her money to keep her quiet. He never told me. He said he was ashamed. He said it started before he left. One message turned into 10. One payment became 20. By the time she dumped the kids on me, he felt trapped. He didn't want to lose his job. He didn't want to lose me. But he didn't know how to face it. So he stayed away. I felt sick. I hung up. The next morning, Hunter asked if Janet was trying to take them again. I said no. "You're mine now," I told him. "Legally, forever." He nodded. But I could see the fear in his eyes. I called my lawyer. She said everything Janet was doing, the false reports, break-ins, harassment, would help us. We could use it to seek a permanent restraining order. Maybe even terminate Janet's parental rights. Then Damon called. He warned me that Janet was only chasing government benefits. He offered to testify. He said she told people she was getting paid for having the kids back. I believed him. I took a personal day and filed new school documents to block Janet from picking up the children. I sent updated records to CPS. I asked Scott what would happen if Janet filed another false report. He said it could lead to criminal charges. But Janet didn't stop. She sent tablets in the mail labeled with the kids' names. That violated the restraining order. Then she flew to Thomas's office overseas and caused a scene in the lobby. Security escorted her out. Thomas called me, panicked. That's when he admitted the final truth. Janet wasn't pregnant. She never had been. She lied to control him. She faked ultrasound messages and even printed out appointment slips. He never asked questions because he didn't want to believe it. He sent money to silence her. He thought ignoring her would make it go away. Now it was all unraveling. I asked him to send everything, screenshots, receipts, messages. He did. Our lawyer said we had more than enough. We filed for a permanent restraining order. We prepared for court. But the fallout was everywhere. Hunter overheard me talking to the lawyer and asked, "Does Janet want money more than us?" I didn't lie. I said, sometimes adults make awful choices. But I'll always protect you. Then we got another call. Janet had been arrested again. This time for using a stolen credit card at a hotel down the street from our home. She was violating the restraining order again. The next day, Thomas told his company everything. He confessed about the blackmail, the payments, the lies. They suspended him with pay and allowed him to come home. He arrived 3 days later. I didn't let him in right away. We sat outside on the steps. He looked thinner. Tired. He showed me his phone, all the messages, all the threats. He said he was wrong. He said he should have come clean from the start. He said he watched me raise the kids alone and hated himself for not being beside me. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just listened. When I let him in, he saw how much had changed. The living room had bunk beds now. There were drawings on the fridge and backpacks by the door. Photos of the kids and me at the zoo, at school concerts, at home. None of him. Grace didn't recognize him. Annie gave a polite wave. Hunter stared at him for a full minute before turning away. Dinner was quiet. Thomas asked about school. The kids answered with one-word replies. After they went to bed, we talked again. He said he wanted to fix things. He wanted to be their father. He wanted to be my husband again. I said I didn't know if I could forgive him. I said I needed time. Then came the next twist. Aunt Margaret, Janet's aunt, reached out. She hadn't contacted the kids in 2 years. Now suddenly she wanted to reconnect. I was suspicious. Scott had warned me this might happen. I called Margaret. At first, she was friendly. Then the conversation turned cold. She believed Janet's version of events. She accused me of manipulating the courts. She said I brainwashed the kids. I hung up. Thomas was struggling too. He tried to bond with the kids. He read bedtime stories. He helped with homework. He made pancakes. Grace warmed up slowly. Annie let him braid her hair once. Hunter avoided him completely. At the park, one of Hunter's friends' moms whispered, "You're really letting him back in?" Rumors were spreading. Then the phone rang again. Janet was calling, from jail. She said she was sober now. She said she wanted to apologize. She said she'd terminate her rights if I let her see the kids one last time. I didn't believe her. Neither did Thomas. That night, Hunter asked if Janet could still take them. I said no. You're with me forever. He exhaled. The next day, Scott called. Janet was getting out on a plea deal. She'd be living with Margaret, on probation, under supervision. I felt like it was never going to end. Thomas promised he wouldn't leave again. But promises are just words until they're proven. At Hunter's soccer game, I spotted someone standing far behind the bleachers. It was Margaret. She wasn't cheering. She wasn't smiling. Just staring. Thomas noticed her too. He stood up, walked across the field, and confronted her quietly but firmly. He told her to leave and not come back. He warned her we'd file another restraining order. Margaret didn't argue. She just turned and walked away. That night, Thomas and I had the real conversation. No more half-truths. No more guilt-wrapped silence. I told him that I understood the fear. I understood the shame. But I couldn't understand why he left me to raise traumatized children alone for nearly 2 years. He looked at the floor. He said the guilt paralyzed him. He said the longer he stayed away, the harder it was to come back. I asked if he'd been with anyone else during those 2 years. He shook his head and said no. He swore he hadn't touched anyone. Just work and shame and silence. I believed him. But forgiveness isn't instant. I told him we could try to rebuild, but it would be on my timeline. The next morning, while Thomas went out for a run, Hunter came into the kitchen. He poured cereal, sat at the table, and asked, "Is Thomas staying?" I paused. Then I told him the truth. We were trying to work things out. But whether it worked or not, he and his sisters would always stay with me. He nodded slowly. Then he whispered, "I want to call you Mom, but I don't know if I should call him Dad yet." My throat tightened. I told him he didn't have to decide right now. He could take all the time he needed. Later that afternoon, the phone rang again. It was the school. Janet had shown up, again. This time she was screaming at the front desk, yelling that I had brainwashed her children. She was arrested on sight. She had violated the restraining order once more. The next day, Damon called. He said Janet had already made bail again. And now she was claiming she had proof that would destroy me in court. Thomas and I stayed up that night reviewing everything. We had nothing to hide. But we didn't know what she was planning. 2 days before the emergency hearing, Damon called again. He said he met with Janet under the pretense of being on her side. She showed him her proof. They were real screenshots of texts between her and Thomas, but heavily edited. She had deleted her threats, cropped the conversations, and arranged them to look like they were in a romantic relationship. She even had bank records, edited to look like Thomas was financially supporting her as his mistress. It was disturbing. Because the texts were real, but manipulated into something they weren't. She was going all in. The worst part? She created a Facebook group and invited dozens of people. She posted her version of the story. She claimed I had stolen her children. She claimed Thomas had left me for her. She posted the edited screenshots. She even made a fake story about having cancer and needing to get better before reclaiming her children. She lied about everything. Our neighbors saw it. My coworkers saw it. Even the school PTA was tagged. Some people believed her. Others asked questions. But the damage was done. Thomas was heartbroken. He had paid Janet for 2 years just to prevent this exact public humiliation. And now here it was, online, ugly, and viral. The school called again. Hunter had overheard classmates repeating the rumors. One of them said Thomas wasn't his real dad. Hunter exploded. He yelled. He cried. They called me to pick him up early. On the drive home, Hunter asked me the hardest question yet. Is Thomas my real dad? My hands gripped the steering wheel. I pulled over. I turned and looked him in the eyes. No, I said. But he's trying to be. And no matter what, I am your mom. And nobody is going to take that away. That night, we documented every lie Janet had posted. We printed everything. Screenshots. Receipts. Timestamps. Our lawyer prepared the case. Then the day finally came. We walked into the courtroom, ready. Janet was there with Margaret. She looked smug, confident. She tried to hand the judge her phone to show the affair screenshots. The judge cut her off immediately. He had already reviewed everything submitted in the formal file. He knew the screenshots were altered. He had reviewed the CPS reports, the restraining order violations, the school disturbances, and the pattern of behavior. He ordered Janet's phone confiscated as evidence. Then, without hesitation, he revoked her bail. She was to be remanded into custody for violating the terms of her release. Then came the real moment, our motion to terminate her parental rights. The judge reviewed all supporting documents. He asked Janet if she wanted to make a statement. For the first time, she seemed quiet. She stood. She said she had made mistakes. She said she was not ready to be a mother. She said she understood now that the best place for the kids was with me. And she said she would voluntarily terminate her rights. I didn't know what to feel. Relief. Sadness. Gratitude. Or just, finally peace. Then the judge asked if any of the children wanted to speak. Hunter stood up. He said, I want to stay with my mom. I'm not scared anymore. I'm safe. The judge nodded. The courtroom was silent. Then he granted the petition. Janet's parental rights were officially terminated. I was now their mother, legally, forever. Adoption finalized. No going back. We left the courthouse and walked out into the sunlight. I felt like I could breathe for the first time in years. That night, the four of us curled up on the couch in our new home. Annie asked if that meant they'd never have to go live with the scary lady again. I said, never again. Grace grinned and asked if we could get a dog now. Hunter leaned against my shoulder and whispered, thanks, Mom. And that word, Mom, hit me deeper than any court ruling ever could. That one word made every sleepless night, every CPS visit, every tear, every courtroom appearance worth it. Healing didn't happen overnight. Grace still had nightmares. Annie still hid snacks under her pillow. Hunter still had trouble trusting adults. But slowly, we were learning how to be a family. Thomas worked hard to rebuild trust. He found a job locally. He was home for dinner every night. He helped with school pickups. He listened. He apologized again and again. He showed up. And that mattered more than any fancy gesture. We started family therapy. We had setbacks. Arguments. Tears. But we also had laughter. School projects. Movie nights. Birthday candles. Photos on the fridge. We were becoming something real. As for Janet, she stayed in jail until her rehab program accepted her transfer. I don't know what she's doing now. And I don't care. The restraining order remains. If she violates it again, she'll face real prison time. Margaret disappeared. No more calls. No more drama. Peace. To the people who said I should have returned the kids when Janet came back. You don't return children like borrowed furniture. They're human beings. They're not second chances you hand back when someone reappears with a sob story. They needed stability. They needed love. They needed someone to stay. So I stayed. I stayed when they screamed in their sleep. I stayed when Hunter stood guard at the door. I stayed when Grace asked for her real mommy at 3 a.m. while burning with a fever. I stayed when Annie begged me not to send her away. I stayed when the world said I shouldn't have to. I stayed because they were mine. Not by blood. Not by papers. But by love. And now they call me Mom. That's my happy ending. Even if it's not perfect. Even if my marriage is still healing. Even if we carry scars. We are a family. And no manipulative sister-in-law, no scared husband, no Facebook mob will ever change that. Because when everything fell apart, I didn't run. I didn't hide. I fought. And I will keep fighting. Every single day. For as long as they need me.